I think you're probably right for just getting started in this business in some capacity, at least 20 to 30,000 that is considered disposable. Because what's up, everybody? Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkost here with another episode of the Big Picture Blueprint, where it's just Dan and myself today. But before we get into what we're talking about, which I think is kind of at the forefront of our minds because we're along the path and the journey that we'll be discussing. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. It's nice out here this time of year. Business is busy. I told you the last, month and a half, I got kicked in the teeth a bit, but such is life. So continuing forward and doing more deals and buying more land.
That's funny you say that, where I'm like, dude, things are going well. I lost $40,000 on a deal 2 weeks ago, and I feel like things are going well just because I'm getting my capital back and inventory starting to turn over, and I've got a lot of good things in the works where I feel like mistakes in this business, sometimes it just takes so long to get kicked in the teeth, where it's like, just kick me and get it over with so I can move on and not think about it and have to worry about it.
Yeah.
But that's probably my own mindset issue. So today, Dan and I are going to be talking about really what it takes to build a $10 million a year company. And I think that the conversation is going to be centered around land and minor development type business rather than everything. But I guess really we're going to use ourselves as templates of what we're doing to get to 10 million a year, because I feel like that's kind of our next big milestone for both of us. But before we,
Yeah.
expand more on that, Dan, do you feel like we're just creating an arbitrary number that's outrageous, or is this something that's actually realistic and feasible for both of us to achieve in our 30s?
Oh, it's absolutely feasible. And I'm glad you made the caveat to everyone listening. This is something we are working on. We have not yet done. So this is our thesis as to how it's doable. But to your question, Mason, of is it feasible? Well, I've met a number of people that I know have this or even potentially a 10x of what we're talking about in the land space. So I know it's feasible because we're not doing something brand new or starting some new tech business or coming up with a new product. We're doing a very tried and true business that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So yes, it's absolutely doable. And I think we both know what to do. It's just executing and, as Hormozy always says, eating the glass for long periods of time, which is what it often feels like in business.
And to clarify, are we going to talk about what it takes to get to 10 million gross revenue per year or 10 million in net EBITDA, per year?
Well, really both, because the concepts are the same. But I think for the sake of it not being too big of a number and also not being too far from where we're at, let's call it 10 million in revenue with a, 20 to 30% profitability.
I think so. I think that's probably fair because I think with the model that we're discussing, without just extreme amounts of volume, getting to 10 million EBITDA ends up being anywhere from 75 to 130 million in gross per year. But yeah, I think 10 million revenue, about 3 million in EBITDA per year is probably the target that we're talking about. So let's create kind of a starting point, and we can base it on where we started, or we can create it, based on the ideal, because I don't know if I started like whenever I jumped into business, if I was in the ideal phase of my life or space of my life to do it.
Well, so what you're referring to, I think, is the financial position you're in, right? You have to have money of some kind if you want to start a business. And if you're going to do this at a $10 million level, you're going to need a lot of money, right? So I think there's kind of two things here. I think you need to have a decent personal financial position where you're not broke or struggling and you don't have a bunch of credit card debt or anything like that, and should have some of your own liquid cash. But then you also should plan for, all right, where is my capital going to come from for all of these land deals? So in my opinion, you should have, at least 20 or 30 grand in the bank and, be comfortable. And then you also need to ahead of time preemptively source your money, whether it's through equity or debt. And we'll get into that. What do you think, Mason?
I think you're probably right for just getting started in this business in some capacity, at least 20 to 30,000 that is considered disposable. Because I mean, I joked about it I did lose 40 grand on a deal just a few weeks ago. And that sucks, but it's okay. At the beginning, for the first year or two, I never lost any money, but that has since changed. And I think that it takes a lot of money and time and effort spent into marketing at the beginning to start getting deals. And I think you should probably buy your first deal yourself. It's hard to justify raising investor capital if you've never done it yourself. So 20 to 30 getting started when you have a job that's secure and stable. And I think probably over 100 grand that is allocated entirely towards this business venture is what you need before you actually leave your job. I know other people will disagree with that. I wasn't there whenever I started. I had just bought my first deal and maybe had 25,000, 30,000 left over for the business whenever I quit my job. But my first deal ended up being that slam dunk 100K plus profit deal. But do you agree with that? Do you think you should leave your active, stable job, before you have 100 grand saved up for this?
This is one of those questions that the people, at least I'll speak for myself, the people like me and probably the people like you aren't going to listen to us anyways. So they're gonna when they feel ready, they're gonna leave regardless. And so, I think you probably should have a cushion close to that. I mean, if you're a single person, no kids, no spouse, or maybe you have a spouse who makes a bunch of money and is on board with you taking the venture, the leap of faith, okay, you could probably have less in the bank. But if you have dependents, especially maybe your spouse doesn't make as much as you or doesn't make that much, you got kids, a mortgage, I would want to see darn close to that before leaving the job.
Yeah, agreed. And it's this difficult thing where it's like you have to put yourself through a certain amount of pain in order to take action. But we're creating an ideal scenario here because if you have 100K liquid, you have quit your job, you've got money on the side too, and it depends on if you're married or if you're single. Like this is just dedicated towards the business. We're not talking about put 100K in your life savings account and take it out for this. This is to give you a good amount of runway to effectively implement all the systems and business processes that it takes to start moving towards kind of that first goal of call it that 300K per year if we're seeking out 30% 30% margin with decent deal cycle turnover time kind of at the beginning. But what does that look like? Or go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was going to say, I want to talk more about debt and equity and planning to have the capital available to build this business beyond your own. But before we get into that, can we talk about, thinking big picture, the pieces you're going to have to put together to build this, deal type and strategy? Can we establish that before we go any further with the debt and equity? Because the type of debt or equity you'll go after is going to vary depending on your deal, your strategy. And land and development is such a wide net. What do you think? I mean, I know what I think, and I'll hit on that, but should someone only do one type of land, one strategy? Should they have two? What does it look like there?
I think at the very, very beginning, I think it does start with just one strategy. The reason behind it is far more educational than it is investment thesis. I think it's so beneficial to just go full transaction from lead to acquisition to disposition in a sale, even if the margins aren't insane or, it's not the most long-term thinking of buying a property for 10 grand, selling it for 16 grand, just to get through what that actually looks like. And then from there, I think that's where you can start kind of instituting a few more strategies. But I think at the very beginning, doing a handful of just traditional land flips while you have your job, I think that's where I would personally get started.
So I agree, but let's talk, you've got big goals. You want that $10 million a year business and you want to build from day one to that end goal. And so you're building out this framework as you go. So great, you're going to start with the small land flips, but what does that look like, that business? Two strategies? Are you doing everything? Are you only doing land flips? What, in your opinion, does that goal look like of the model that makes $10 million a year?
Oh, you're saying for whenever you're actually at that 10 million, what does it look like? So you
Well,
have an idea, or
I'm saying that newbie is new, but they have a goal of 10 million a year. And so they're building out the framework of what I'm working towards as a business that does I'm implementing these three strategies with this debt and equity and this team, and that's going to get me to that level, right? What does that look like?
I hear you. My answer remains the same because I think that the idea of getting to 10 million a year will take a decade or so to effectively build a business that's sustainable to do it. So I think that getting too caught up in the systems of scaling before you've even done a few transactions, I, I hold fast to my answer there of I think you should do a handful of just simple land flips before doing anything else. And that's the model you should build your business on until you get to the point where you have so much cash that you can start using traditional financing methods, which, that's part of the answer that I think you're looking for too. Of, I think if you can go the traditional bank financing route, whenever you start jumping into larger deals, I think that's going to set you up for such a more sustainable long-term success model than what I feel like you and I have potentially gone down. But you answer your own question.
Yeah, well, for me, especially, I think of how I actually started, and I didn't have as much money as we're talking about. I did mostly flips for cash. I had a number of notes on smaller deals, which was nice, but I think I should have done that at a bigger level where I did notes, selling on terms, and then simple land flips. And I wish I would have sooner used my investor who's funding pretty much all my deals to take down bigger deals and sold more of them on terms and had more of that monthly recurring revenue to complement the land flips, because I think that alone, actually I know it is because I've seen it, is a model that can be taken to 10 million. I think the biggest thing that I did that was wrong is, or not wrong, but not what I want in hindsight, is selling too much for cash, not benefiting from the interest rates you can get on land, and having moved too much of that cash into rental property. So I think that it's feasible to have some cash sales and some note sales right from the beginning. And so that's what I would have done differently and kind of what I was getting at, because just that alone is scalable to the numbers we're talking about.
So I agree with that. The thing that I'll partially dissent on is for the person that doesn't have the mentor that they could have tied them, kind of hitch their wagon to a little bit. I feel like focusing a little bit on just going full cycle with a transaction. Yeah, sprinkling a note in, because inevitably you're going to get a deal that it's not going to sell for cash right away. And being able to sprinkle those notes in and start having those perform where people keep paying off their notes. And I'm like, you don't have to. Like, it'd be nice if you did, but like, you actually don't have to now. But at the beginning, the first time someone paid off their note early, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I just got all my cash back on the deal as versus what my returns would have looked like kind of on the long term. So I still think that if you can figure out the system to make money and have enough money yourself to eventually go into kind of the traditional financing to do some of the bigger land flips, I think you're going to set yourself up really, really well for success with that model. And then because once you get that model, it's the idea of like, there's still traditional financing available for doing these owner financing deals, where if you go buy 1,000 acres at 1,000 an acre for $1 million and you go turn around and sell it for 3 million an acre, you can do partial releases on those notes whenever you subdivide and split off.
Not 3 million an acre. I think you meant 3,000 an acre.
I meant 3,000 an acre. 3 million total in gross sales before financing is what I mean.
Yep.
you can create a certain level of arbitrage there, even if you have to deploy more capital into the deal to get all those notes performing. But I do think that if you can at the beginning start establishing some of the traditional lending, just dynamics with a local bank that you like working with earlier, where you and I don't have those relationships. We have relationships with huge banks, which are fine. But I can promise you Chase is not going to go to me and be like, yeah, we'll give you a 30-year mortgage on a land loan. And I think that's one of the points that I really want to make. And I feel like one of your kind of newer connections that you're working with, that they do everything through a bank, right?
Yeah.
That right there is so powerful. Even if it's a big pain in the ass on the paperwork side, I think that's kind of one of those beginning relationships that if you're on that path to 10 million a year, if you can start creating a really good lender relationship with with an institution, you're going to put yourself in a really, really good position. Because I think that while there are people out there that are the private financiers and private money people and mentors and stuff like that, that'll put money into your deal, I mean, they'll come and go. If you have a deal that goes south and the relationship wasn't perfect, like there goes that source, as versus the bank that you can just pay the debt on the note, and keep things moving. But
Well, no, I agree entirely. And what you're talking about is doing work ahead of time for something that you're not going to do till down the road, right? Establishing these relationships. And that's kind of what I was getting at with the different strategies is maybe you're just flipping, but you want to build the bigger model. So I think that ahead of time, establishing a couple strategies is key so that you can do exactly what you're saying. Work on the pieces and parts to put those bigger strategies ahead of time, right? And you'll be so far ahead of the curve once you do have the money and the bandwidth and the experience to go do those larger projects, whatever they might be.
absolutely. So let's break it down a little bit, to kind of summarize what we're talking about, and then we'll be able to expand more on it. Is at the beginning, figure out how to do it, figure out the business model, get the education, do some small deals yourself, just so you can have a track record. So whenever you approach whatever the financing institution is, whether it's a private money person, a land lender or a community bank or whatever it might be, you have that track record that you can start kind of building on. But what we're talking about here at the beginning is simple land flips, larger land flips, and then kind of more minor subdivisions / exempt subdivisions. We're not talking about doing like a planned, master plan community or anything like this at this point in time. But laying the groundwork for being able to do these multiple strategies while developing these relationships is something that right at the beginning you need to be focusing on, kind of more than anything.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so once you get some experience and you've started to create relationships with the bank, you're building up your cash reserves, what other considerations are there, major considerations for actually building out a real business?
I think it's going to start with what the team looks like, where you can do some of this yourself, but I think if you need actual lead flow, I think that's going to be a major consideration on the sales manager component of this job. But I think potentially more important than that, because I feel like right now we're still in this like low 6-figure range that we're talking about business and laying the groundwork to expand to this phase. I think getting an admin or a transaction coordinator is crucial right off the bat. I've hired a transaction coordinator now, and she's making my life so much easier. And I think a few episodes ago, we talked about potentially bringing the transaction coordinator type position into my investment business. And I feel more and more confident that that's something that I really would want to do, just because it's just made my life so much easier. But you need a bookkeeper, you need an accountant, and I think if you can get admin, bookkeeping, and accounting taken care of in an organized way right off the bat, that's actually going to lay a lot of the groundwork. But I think the next position after that is the sales manager, more focused on acquisitions, outbound lead generation. And we can kind of talk about how how you structure that, how you incentivize that too, a little bit, even though we have a few episodes that discuss this topic specifically.
Yeah, agreed. I think I would have that TC, that transaction coordinator, do a lot of other admin work because early on, I mean, most of the time they're not going to have much to do. They're going to be sitting on their hands. So there's a lot of data work, scrubbing, sorting, that sort of thing that they should be doing for you. Um, and then just to piggyback on what Mason said, just don't hire out the most important part of the whole business, which is sales and closing deals right at the beginning. Don't do that. That is key. Make sure you're doing that as long as you can. And because no one's going to be as well incentivized as you unless you're giving them, ownership in the company, which I doubt, or I wouldn't necessarily recommend.
Yeah. And that was mistakes that both Dan and I made. I think even now we don't have our company as well organized or structured as it could be with as much administrative assistance as we could have. But I think outsourcing sales is the worst decision you can make. I think people, and there's so many products and service organizations out there that are telling you that, oh, here, it's a turnkey organization that will generate all your leads for you and will close all your deals for you and all this different kind of stuff. And the problem is it's, only as effective as it can be. And if you don't master that technique in-house, you really have to, I think, look in the mirror and see what kind of organization you're actually building, because this is such a sales-focused organization that is so people-dependent that if you outsource absolutely everything, the main touch point of contact within this process of sales, I think your business is going to struggle for a really long time. And I think we've seen that of people that get in, they try to outsource everything right away, and then they never end up completing a transaction. They burn through all their funds on services or marketing material without honing their own individual sales process. And then once you get that sales process to a point where you're like, I've hit my capacity, I'm not able to answer calls anymore because I have too many calls coming in, that's whenever you need to hire someone, as versus to the point where it's like, I feel uncomfortable talking to people on the phone, or I'm tired of talking to people on the phone. Because if you look at your daily calendar, an absolute majority of the work that you need to be doing should be sales focused until you hire a salesperson. If all of your focus is administrative, you need to hire an administrative person and then move yourself back into a sales oriented role. Because that right there is at the beginning of this is the most important part of building a business to get you to that $10 million a year standpoint is sales, which starts with acquisitions and then obviously disposition. You can, we'll talk about dispo later, but I think that that needs to be at absolute capacity before any other discussions really happen with the organization building side of things.
Yeah, I agree. Now, something we need to talk about there, though, is your funnel and your strategy, because, again, if you're brand new, this isn't going to be applicable to you, but, we just had our 100th episode and a bunch of big land investors on the show, and many of them don't do any direct-to-seller marketing. And so I think that pretty quickly, again, to your point about thinking long-term and working on relationships ahead of time, like with the bank, even if you're not going to be using those initially, you should be doing the same thing. Once you've gotten some traction, you've done some deals, you have some markets, in those markets, a good realtor broker that can potentially bring you subdivide plays, maybe distressed properties that you can buy at a discount if you solve the problem, will serve you and will help over time to reduce your dependency on direct-to-seller marketing to get deals.
Absolutely. And we've talked about it. Direct-to-seller marketing is such an important skill to build in this business that you're creating because it's a scrappy method of getting business done. But with that being said, like, you can be scrappy to maybe like 1 or 2 million a year, assuming that you're in markets that you're actually capable of operating in, and have a decent risk mitigation strategy. Yeah, you can be like, I created a $100 million direct-to-seller marketing business. And the thing is, there's a few people out there that have done it. And we want to be a part of a majority that created a business that's actually sustainable regardless of market conditions. We're recording this June 3rd of 2025. all the data for the past week or two in the real estate market is, for the first time in however long, the number of sellers is far greater than the number of buyers. There's 700,000 more sellers than there are buyers, which is a really exciting time for a potential distressed acquisition. Maybe more so with rental properties, but in the land market too. I've got buyer clients now that I'm working on market deals for. Submitted an offer this morning for a rundown mobile home that having the well and septic installed already, even though we would have to haul away the mobile home, there's still enough room in this deal to make things happen. And the only way that they were going to get a deal like this was looking on the market and working with someone. So I think that while the direct to seller marketing is a really scrappy way to get started, being able, just like you said, work with a local realtor, really understand and master a particular market, so where you're able to find these discount market opportunities that you're able to add enough value to contribute, to that downstream revenue, because you need multiple revenue streams in order to get to that $10 million number.
Yeah, agreed. And the less dependent you are on direct to seller marketing, the better. And hey, the cheaper your upfront expenses are to get properties to monetize, right? And so that's another advantage. Let's see. Anything else that you want to say on the team, Mason, and the acquisition and disposition funnels?
I think when you start getting to that $10 million number, I feel like you're able to really focus on bringing things in-house, both on the acquisition and the disposition sides. I think that working with realtors is great. I think obviously for me, I'm very biased, which, go back and listen to the episode about whether or not it makes sense you as an investor should get licensed. But I think being able to eventually bring your team in-house versus relying on contractors for the sales side of things, particularly on the disposition side, will end up contributing to the ability to have an additional revenue stream that gets you closer to that number. But you have any more thoughts on that? I mean, we did a whole episode kind of on this theory, but
No, I think that's good. I kind of want to move towards, the person that they've gotten started. They've done all the land flips for a while, or this the simple cash land flips, maybe a few owner carry deals, and they're pushing towards the next level. And so I want to clarify at least how we're doing this. How do you incorporate more strategies, build a bigger business? Maybe you add in new construction, maybe you get your real estate license without running the risk of doing too many things at once. How do you drive more revenue, add more tools to your tool belt, but not get distracted and away from what's made you money?
good question. I think the way I want to frame it is, and I know we're going all over the place a little bit with this, which is, partially the goal of us having just a conversation of, okay, it's like the thought experiment of when I'm driving down the highway with my wife and I see that the Mega Millions is at $1 billion or something like that, of like, okay, if you won $1 billion, what would you do with it? And so kind of starting a little bit with the end in mind here of my $10 million business, $10 million a year business looks like this, where we've got the realtor side of things representing buyers and sellers. That's going to contribute probably 300,000 to 1.5 million per year in revenue. We've got the land flipping side of just the simple land flips. I think that right there is going to contribute an additional 500,000 to 1 million. Then we've got the larger land flips of subdivisions, as well as potentially just some big deals like that we've got working on right now. I think that's another 1.5 to 2 million a year. And then I think the rest of it would come from new construction, both modular homes as well as stick-built homes, is probably the additional 4 to 5 million in gross revenue per year. And I think that gets you to the 10 million plus number. And that's a decent combination, with some stuff being much higher margins, which I don't know what your construction margins are. but to stuff with ridiculous infinite margins like the realtor stuff. So we're having these different kind of strategies that all have differing levels of return, from low return, which the lowest cash on cash return would be the properties we're selling on terms, which might have a 2 or a 3 year payback period, as versus the highest cash on cash return, which is the realtor stuff where there's almost no cash deployed. So why don't you take that and run with it for a little bit?
So I'm thinking about this a little bit differently, where what I'm working to do is really over time move almost exclusively to, not exclusively, I'm exaggerating, but mostly to just like this Colorado deal I'm working on right now. You know, buy 640 acres, split it into 16 parcels, sell all of it on terms, get a bank loan, 80%, 20% cash. And there's an arbitrage, obviously, on the price where the collective sales price should be close to double what the purchase price is. And there's an arbitrage on the debt where the bank rate is 8-ish, and then selling on terms at 10 or 12% consistently is very doable. And again, I'm not inventing this. Plenty of other people have done it for a very long time. And I've done it on individual deals, but just the doing it that way, right? Buying these big tracts, the complexity, the time and effort around buying the parcels goes down dramatically, because one acquisition is going to yield 16-ish deals, as opposed to just all the headache that's involved in doing these one-off land deals. So for me, that's what I'm driving towards, that to be most of the land business, the solely land business, solely land focused business. Now, I'm sure some people are going to buy for cash. Some people are going to pay it off quickly, right? It's not all going to be a perfectly amortized note, but that's mostly what I want to do. I want to get away from the individual buying and selling, because there's just so much complexity when driving towards such a large number. And then I will continue in conjunction with that to do the new construction, because that's a better cash producer, right? Because the notes are slow and steady.
Yeah. No, and I think that right there creates a decent mix of that kind of, spread of return that I'm talking about there, where I think about the perfect deal to me would be you buy 350 acres at, call it 1,000 an acre, and you put it on the market at 3,000 an acre. Your goal on that particular deal would be to, for me, obviously I'm going to be listing it myself. So I may save a little money on commission there, or take the commission, have it move towards something else, but probably 5 or 6 of them that you can sell on terms, maybe 1 or 2 of them that you can sell for cash, and then 1 or 2 of them that you can build on, and then sell those for cash, or sell them owner financing, depending on kind of what your bank statement looks like, but probably just sell them, turn around and sell them for cash. And maybe one that you build and you keep as a rental, where that right there is the perfect deal of being able to have the simplicity of selling a bunch of stuff on terms, getting some cash back, getting some larger returns back on the new construction, and then, keep a rental that's, you're able to help offset some of the revenue generated from this one individual project that you created. Because I think the markets that we're doing business in, some of them work well for just doing the sell on terms. Some of them work better for selling for cash. Some of them work really well for new construction. Some of them work really well for buy and hold, buy, build, and hold. And I think if you can have you do a project like that, one project like that, you're ending up adding, like, from a gross revenue standpoint, say you sell, 2 homes at $500,000 each, there's $1 million. You sell 6 properties on terms at, what is that? What did I say? 3,000 an acre. There's another 630,000, which you'd probably get 500,000 plus in receivables from it. And then you get a few selling like that. And I mean, there you go. You do a few projects like that a year, and you're at the $10 million number. And you're setting yourself up really, really long term. So, I don't know. I think that to me is the perfect deal where you can encompass all of it. You're not getting distracted, even if you have additional vertical integrations within your company, because it's all centralized into one or two projects that you're able to keep sustainable, repeatable systems for over and over again.
There's something I wanted to pick out from what you just said. It's some markets are good for selling for cash. Some markets are good for selling on terms. And this has really been driven home in my head recently because, and really it's a big part of why I didn't continue to sell on terms, because most of what I was selling and have sold in the last, 6-7 years has been property that's going to have a home put on it soon. So they don't want terms. And if they do, it's short and they pay it off the vast majority of the time. It's a few exceptions, right? So you need to be aware of what niche you're in, right? It's funny. I was talking to a guy in the business. All he does is sell on terms, and the markets he's in, he's selling like crazy. But if you go on Zillow, there aren't a lot of sales because these aren't cash sales. They aren't getting recorded. They're all via contract for deed, and people buy them like crazy, but you don't see that on Zillow, and vice versa, because he wants to incorporate more cash deals. I said, well, look on Zillow where there are a lot of on-market transactions, because those are very likely cash. There aren't a ton of people listing on Zillow on the MLS that sell on terms. And so you need to be aware of this. If you're trying to move more or less in one direction, what is the norm in that market? And what does the buyer pool have or not have available?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount of stuff that I see just driving out east where it's land for sale, owner financing, direct, for sale by owner, everything like that. I see those signs all the time. And I think just to hammer the point home that you're talking about, real estate is so location focused. So while we might be talking about some individual strategies, you just have to make sure it works in your particular market and sub-market for the type, beyond just the market, but the type of deal that you're actually working on structuring. Because otherwise you're going to end up getting stuck with a ton of inventory that, the strategy doesn't right. The pricing strategy was never right. And then you're never going to actually scale the business because your turnover time is going to take so long. Now, I know with some of these longer term deals, like it's not a big stress if it takes a year or two to sell some of these properties. But in general, if you want to create a sustainable business, the quicker you can turn something into a cash flow producing asset, the better off you're going to be. It's like the idea of, even if you buy a super cheap rental property, you want to get tenants in it as quickly as possible, even if it's just breaking even, just so you have some form of revenue coming in to make it so where your operations are able to be sustained.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That's one thing that I've been thinking about differently, where I've always thought as the real estate being the long-term, the rental properties as being the long-term asset that I put debt on and cash flow. But again, having spoken to a number of people recently who have just much bigger businesses than me, I see how they'll put debt on a nice subdivision that they do. They'll, of course, do some improvements oftentimes, or maybe not, and they attack it the same way that I think about a rental property, where, again, like I said earlier, they're selling for 1.5 to 2.5 times what they bought it for, and arbitraging the debt at a higher rate, and then just quickly paying off the debt. And then they essentially have a big annuity for 10 or 15 years with little to no cash in it after that debt's paid off. And so it's just, for me, I think that is the key, or the most feasible, scalable, repeatable way to move the business towards 10 million a year.
Absolutely. So let's break it down, Dan, of, for you at 10 million per year, how would you allocate that? Of where does that money come from on a given year? Go for it.
I would guess that this ends up looking like 70 or 80% of that coming from notes, coming from recurring revenue. And then on top of that, the extra being from new construction, and then the properties that people choose to buy outright, or maybe the notes they get paid off quickly. But ultimately, I want to keep this as simple as possible, where I am just selling land and building on some of those pieces of land and selling the houses. That's it. I want to keep this very simple, repeatable. And so with that, the team, right, is going to look a little different. There's going to be several clerical employees, probably an in-house bookkeeper handling the notes, just handling all the accounting, people dealing with customer service, both on the transaction coordination side of things and then also on the sales side of things. I would expect to bring sales in-house by that point. There's a couple different ways you can potentially set that up. And then salespeople on the acquisition would look a little different than today because, again, in this future that we're working to build, the access to capital gets greater and greater over time. And much of the land that I would be buying isn't just going direct to mom and pop sellers. Still absolutely going to target those prime big pieces of land that are ideal for subdividing. And so some of it I'm sure will be direct to seller, but a lot of it will just be bought on market, just talking to brokers. And so the in-house salesperson would spend more of their time analyzing stuff on market deals that brokers are sending, along with, targeting those very specific prime parcels for subdivision. But yeah, one big question, and I'm not sure, again, thinking with some of the conversations I've had recently with people that have the business that we're talking about, and even much greater than 10 million a year, they all have brought the GC for the new builds in-house. And so that would probably have to happen to do what I want to do here. Of course, there's some markets in the country, quite a few actually, where you don't even need a license to build, but then you'd still be, bringing the project manager and coordinating the subs. That would need to be in-house. So that's something I have to figure out and decide on if I want to do. But that would, again, be down the road.
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of strategic partnerships that you can create where you don't actually have to be on the hook for the salary or anything. And I mean, because I've seen that too with people in this business that are in that centimillionaire status, that they just have like one agent they work with, and that's it.
Yeah.
They do everything. Not that they're not open to partnerships and doing everything like that, but they've built out the systems and it's so relationship focused. Of the same thing of it's all the same well drilling company and septic install companies, and yeah, they're not on salary, but they've just got agreements with them where you're able to honestly negotiate certain discounts by being able to have a great amount of volume. Because I mean, shoot, we've thought about everything from bringing accounting in-house and bookkeeping in-house to bringing legal in-house. And I think it really depends on, how many sections or kind of service lines within the business that you have, and whether or not the expense is justified on what the returns are. Where you see Logan Fulmer, who we've had on the podcast a couple times now with curative title, and it starts making sense having that lawyer in-house. And with the complexity of some of these deals that, you're starting to do where you're selling tons of parcels on seller financing and, offering potentially additional lending and all sorts of different stuff, where you can bring everything in-house that you want to, or you can just create strategic partnerships throughout where everyone is an expert. But I think where Dan and I have learned the most lessons over the past few years is don't try to be that expert yourself. Figure out what you're good at and build your company around what you're good at, or whatever the main purpose of it is, which, it's land acquisitions and sales, is what we've, done. And then for everything else, work with the expert, because I mean, we're not trying to be exactly, we function as a bank whenever we're selling on terms essentially, but we're not trying to be the bank exactly.
Well, one thing I guess that I really want to pull out of this whole conversation is at least the way that I think about this. And having seen so many people fail in the business, seeing a lot of people go out of business, seeing what has constrained me and mistakes I've made, and some of it applicable to you too, is business is complicated enough as it is. There are so many problems all the time, with sellers, with buyers, with the government, with just everything, that to really build something big, and in our minds, 10 million a year is pretty big, it has to be simple, right? And this is where I really think it's going to be hard. Here's my honest opinion. I think it's really going to be hard for you to do this if you're trying to be a realtor, do new construction, subdivides on terms, simple land flips from direct to seller. I honestly think that it's going to be really difficult. You're going to need so many different specialized employees. It's like, I want to just buy big tracts of land and resell it on terms because there's going to be enough pain in the ass just doing that, let alone trying to deal with retail clients and keep the direct to seller funnel going and new construction, which I said I would be doing. So that's my other bucket. But you see what I'm saying? What do you think?
I agree, but I think it's all part of the process of, I think that you need to kind of do a lot at the beginning while you're young and you have energy and you have the ability to take some risks, um, to just build up those reserves where you're not as stressed about things, where if you don't have a couple million cash in the bank, you're not going to be lendable. So we're saying this stuff, but if you like, you're not going to be able to employ the strategy if you're still in that 6-figure mark, I feel like. I don't know if you agree with that or you've seen differently, but I think in order to go out and buy, $1 million in real estate that you're selling on terms over decades, you need to be a multimillionaire.
Well, it's tricky because getting to that point, I don't think it's as clean as we're making it out to be, where you've got to just figure it out. And where, just like when I was new and didn't have much money, most of the land flips, I had to give away a big piece to get them funded. I'm now doing it now with these big deals. And so I think it's a mix. Yeah. So to clarify what you said about having multiple millions liquid, if you want to go get huge bank loans on land, you're going to need a strong balance sheet and a strong cash position. I agree. But it is feasible to find investors to put these things together sooner. I will say that. And there are smaller, cheaper versions of it where it could be, this Colorado one I'm doing, I'm 410, 15 grand for the survey. That's all we're putting into it. So that's more in the middle. That's not as intimidating. If I didn't have a lot of cash stuck in Florida deals right now, I could do that myself. So I think there's a middle ground where you can start to work towards it before having that strong of a personal financial statement.
But you gained a pretty strong personal financial statement through doing all of these different things, which also made you an attractive partner to work with on this deal. Where
I will.
you
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, in part of what I'm speaking or saying is looking in hindsight, where it's like almost all of the money has come from just simple land flips. And the other things I've tried to do have not been that productive, other than just to buy and hold rental properties. But that's kind of a different bucket that I'm not really talking about.
Yeah. And new construction's done well for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've had a decent amount of success, 85%, 90% success funding other people's deals as well.
Well, those are just land flips essentially, but yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that through all of these experiences, you're able to talk at an intelligent enough of a level that makes it so where the centimillionaire people that you work with are excited to work with you. Where if you haven't had this much experience and you're just going directly to the bank, like, you still need some experience, but you're not going to get, the crazy investor to work with you, because why would we? Is the main thing. Of, we get those offers all the time of like, can I just pick your brain for this? And I'd love to partner with you on a deal. And it's like, no, I don't have time to, I need everything I'm doing to be generating money. And working with the wrong person will end up costing you more money than making small amounts of money doing kind of meticulous stuff. So I agree of like, I think eventually, we'll both consolidate the business. I'm doing small deals as a realtor, but they're making me an extra $3-4 grand a week, which is great right now for where I'm at in my phase of life. But I will not do those forever. That'll be something that I hire out and I take a portion of the commission on. But the reason I'm doing it is to, get good at buying and selling land from this capacity. So where within my own business and other people's businesses, it's just an additional revenue stream. And, you talk about it of, to go out and get these deals, you need to be networking with brokers. And now I'm able to network, I'm on the inside now, and able to start networking with these brokers and getting to know the landowners that I'm thinking about, there's deals where I've got sellers in my pipeline that I keep a conversation going with, and now we're able to offer this service that, shoot, they have 80 to 100,000 acres throughout, markets that we're doing business in. And I'm like, I'm going to hold this relationship for 10 or 15 years. So whenever they are ready to sell, I'll be the person they come to. And hopefully at that position, I'll be able to say, hey, I can just buy it from you, for this. So I think it's, even if you're doing a lot of different things, each of them have to be making you money. I think they should be related, so where it's not just total distraction and total disruption to whatever you are doing that's actively making you money. And I think that you have to think about whatever the long-term scalability of it actually is, because everything we're talking about, from doing, land flips to the subdivides to major developments, new construction, being a broker, all of these are individual businesses that you can take to get to $10 million a year. But you're going to get there a lot quicker if you can kind of focus on a really streamlined and effective kind of full scale, full stack business that, is actually sustainable.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I think we've kind of laid the groundwork for how each of us are working towards this. Anything else you want to say on the topic, Mason?
No, I don't think so. I think it's, I hope you guys get some actionable steps from this, because it takes a lot of focused effort, and it takes also a lot of, scattered effort a little bit to be able to get yourself to a position where you can start getting into that 8-figure mark. And I think the most important thing I would want to leave everyone with is, this isn't going to happen overnight. It is going to take years and years and years and constant iteration in order to get to that. But you want the iteration to be shifting 1 or 2 degrees to the left or to the right, rather than constantly doing 90-degree and 180-degree pivots. Because every time you have to do a pivot like that, it's typically going to set you back another 2 to 3 years, rather than each thing that you're doing starts actually compounding. Dan and I both have, that's kind of our next goal, is to get to this $10 million a year mark. And we're excited to keep this podcast going until we get there. We'll continue after that too. But, it's a fun documented journey, and we appreciate you guys listening into kind of our rambling conversation about this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was well said. Pick something, or pick a couple strategies within the land space, and work on scaling it to the moon and doing it for years. That's really it. But I think that does it for today. So guys, thanks for tuning in. Dan Haberkost and Mason McDonald, the Big Picture Blueprint, signing off.